AI communication pitfalls, how to avoid them, and when. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Rachel. I'm the founder of PM Advising. I was a principal product manager at Meta and at Amazon and a product manager at Datadog pre-IPO. So the first thing I would love to do is do a bit of an icebreaker. So in the chat, I would love your name, where you're calling from, what you're hoping to achieve in the next 3 months. Would you rather encounter a lion or a shark? I got to encounter both in safe terms. And I would love to know if this is the first time we've met or if we've met before. So put that in the chat, please, and that will also give folks some time to join. A little bit about me. I love accelerating people and teams. I coach senior product managers and leaders in tech through their promotions and career growth. And I also advise startups on AI transformation and up-leveling their product teams. I've helped dozens accelerate their careers. I've spent 17 years doing product at Meta, Amazon, Datadog, Fiverr, both as an IC and as a manager. I've probably interviewed more than 200, if not 300 candidates, 100 at Meta, also calibrated interviewers. So that means I trained and decided who gets to interview. Some recent client success, L7 offer at Mang. This is still under the wraps, and they have a competing offer about for 1.2 million or more. One of my executive coaching clients got recently promoted from an IC to a manager, and this is a person who I also helped landed the job. Mang client got 150,000 salary increase in total compensation for a startup where they were offered a head of product and then a systems engineer at NVIDIA. Also have clients at Meta, Stripe, Google, Levin Labs, OpenAI, and more. So the problem that we're seeing with AI is that polish sometimes gets you nowhere. And so I would love to see in the chat if this ever happened to you. You had a really clear and well-organized answer to an interview question, or you had a polished deck for a pitch. There was very little discussion and you ended up landing nowhere. I would love for you to type in the chat one if this has ever happened to you. Yeah, that tracks. So what we're going to walk away today is understanding how you use AI and how that affects other people's trust in you, where this shows up in product sense, analytical thinking, and system design, and what are things you can do next. And the part one is how trust is really evaluated. This is a quote by Satya Nadella's note about how he thinks organizations should adopt AI. And what he says there is you can offload a task or even a job, but you can never offload your learning. And when we're thinking about the rooms where trust decides outcomes for us, we have the customers who are using our products. We have our leadership chains. We have the people that we're growing if we're people managers, and we have our interviews. Our customers decide if they are going to trust the product. Your leadership chain decides the scope and your compensation and your career trajectory. The people you're growing decide how much they're going to trust you as a leader, and your interviews decide whether you land the job. And what ends up happening is when creating a polished deliverable is cheap, it ends up being that you are evaluated on your thinking. And I would love to hear in the chat which of these feels the hardest for you and why in terms of earning trust. Do you feel like it's your customers, leadership chain, people you're growing, or interviewers? Put that in the chat. Interviews? Interviewers. Anybody sees this in leadership chain or in customers? Okay. Okay. Interviewers. So we're going to go very deep into interviews. By the way, I think this is going to be 45 minutes content and then Q&A, not 30 minutes, but let's see where we land. So there are three tests that you want to think about when you're thinking about your thinking. You can be, and ideally you're all of them, right? Auditable, calibrated, and updatable. And when you're thinking about auditable, it's really how well does your audience understand your logical flow? Calibrated means how well does the confidence of your recommendation, of your statements, of your hypotheses match up with the evidence you present? And there's updatable. How do you respond to new information that is relevant to the problem at hand, and how do you question it? So the first thing is auditable. If somebody can't understand your logical flow, they won't get to the other two. So the foundation of it is that flow. And when you're thinking about the ways people work with AI, and if anybody hasn't had a chance to read or watch any of Vivian Ming's talks, highly recommend Robot Proof: When Robots Take Over the World, Build Better Humans. And she essentially talks about three archetypes of using AI: the automator, the validator, and the cyborg. The automator hands off the problem. They're just takes whatever comes back. The validator asks the model to confirm the point that they are already believing, and the cyborg argues with the AI and makes it work really hard. So I would love to see in the chat what you guys think. Who do you think wins? And which of these do you think best describes you? Maybe the easier one. Who do you think wins? The cyborg? The cyborg? Okay. And you're right. The cyborg wins because it augments your thinking. And the difference is not the tools you use, it's whether you're using them to augment your thinking. When you're thinking about performance, then the automator is essentially, this is through different tests and we'll talk about them, but the automator shows performance roughly equal to AI alone. The validator, number two, actually scores worse than AI alone because essentially you're falling down the trap of confirmation bias. And the cyborg beats everyone. And in this context, we're talking about how the brain functions when you're scanning it while participants were using AI. What was found that the validators were showing less brain power relative to those who were just using AI, and the cyborg were beating everyone. And here's some research about this. So there are actually three studies here. Anthropic ran a study where it took junior developers, 52, with an unfamiliar library. They split the participants. One group used AI an AI assistant to help them with their task. The other half they had no AI assistant. The AI group did score higher when it came to completing the task faster, but when it came to a comprehension test after the fact, the ones coded by hand got that 67% right, and the ones using AI got it 50% right. Similar pattern with in a study that BCG ran. They gave consultants GPT-4 to complete their tasks, and consultants who were using it were faster at delivering their recommendations. But when they were asked follow-up questions and what that meant for bigger implications and follow-up steps for their client strategies, they performed worse. And so what this means is when you're using your AI, it's really important not to outsource your thinking. Okay? Now, since a lot of you mentioned that interviewers is top of mind and where it feels most relevant, this is going to be a comprehensive section about how this shows up in interviews. And please notice that a lot of these are also true on the job. So, just as a high level summary, the three things we're going to discuss in detail are going to be product sense, analytical thinking, and system design. And when you're thinking about what this means in AI, in the context of product sense, does your logic hold end to end? That's always going to be true. Are you still able to show real user empathy? Are you using AI appropriately for research? Meaning, can you differentiate qualitative feedback from quantitative feedback? And can you push back on the data that's being handed to you? And in AI product sense interviews, which are relatively new, can you build a prototype and critique it in under 1 hour? In analytical thinking, it's really important to understand the rationale behind numbers, especially when you're using AI systems. I cannot stress this enough. AI systems are not fully deterministic. They are optimized for outcomes. The incentive or the optimization function that you set for AI is what ends up dictating the outcome that your users and that your system goes through. And so here it means, how do you define success in this context and the goals, and how do you navigate trade-offs? And all of this becomes harder with AI: hallucination rates, determinism, and what is the system optimizing for? System design. As I mentioned earlier, agentic systems are not fully deterministic. We got a painful reminder of this. OpenAI got a painful reminder of this last week in the Hugging Face conundrum. And so really understanding, what are the boundaries? Do you understand how different pieces connect? And what is the blast of influence? And can you navigate trade-offs before they cost user trust? So these are the snapshot of what we're going to go deep on. So let's start with product sense. On product sense at the high level, the AI version of this interviewer, the things that are always true are going to be motivation. Why are we doing this? Who are we building for? And prioritizing what are the problems, and prioritizing what are potential solutions, and prioritizing while keeping a logical flow. So product sense, really a house of cards. And in the new interview types, in 60 minutes, you need to produce a prototype and show how you used AI as a thought partner, not as a substitute for your thinking. The pitfalls. Where does the time go? So time management. And this is really, really hard. And the things that I see people doing wrong here, and again, this is in the context of a 60-minute interview, not when you're given a take-home assignment when theoretically you have up to 48 hours to play around with this. But in 60 minutes, if you're opening the prototyping tool before you develop the thesis, then you're essentially outsourcing your thinking and you're going to be very reactive to whatever the tool comes up with. If you're using it like a whiteboard, that's a very expensive way to waste time in the interview. And really important to leave enough time to iterate with it or critique it. And as you're running, we'll talk about this and what to do instead, but make sure to see how long does each iteration takes and how the prompting of your prototyping tool, how much time each iteration takes as well, because that is going to tell you how much time you're going to have left in your interviews. Where judgment shows. So if you hand the AI a problem list and you just take what comes back, where's your judgment, right? Prioritizing on AI finding alone or on instinct alone, right? So historically, in a product sense interview, you didn't have anything to validate your research with. So it will just be based on your instincts, experience, and logic. But now when you're using AI, you're actually expect to come up with research that helps found your thesis, both in terms of qualitative and quantitative feedback. And you don't always, it's also important to say what you're not doing. and also very important to tell the AI what you don't want or what's out of scope. And how you know it's working, right? In many cases, people, like especially with AI, it's very easy to AI slap and automate what doesn't need to be automated. Um, Trust and privacy end up showing up as a checkbox at the end rather than thought of from the get-go. And this is really important with agentic systems because once the AI genie out of the bottle, it's really hard to put it back in. Once you break trust, it's really hard to win it back. And then quoting model accuracy like it answers a product question. Okay. And all of these, it doesn't mean that you don't know, that you don't understand, that you don't have experience, but it just means that in a limited time, it makes it harder for you to exhibit judgment. What do you want to do instead? You want to spend some time on developing your initial thesis before you prototype. And you want to synthesize your thesis into a prompt that is long enough to cover the key aspects of your thesis, but short enough that it doesn't take too much time for the AI to iterate and comprehend. If you think you're going to develop in 60 minutes a 6-pager PRD and use that for your prototyping, you do not have time for that. And then you want to make sure that you keep the last 10 minutes of the interview, and that includes like 10 minutes net of, questions, answers, chit chat at the end to iterate and critique with the AI. And when you're thinking about judgment, again, you want to bring your own thesis initially and then work with AI to research and challenge it, identify your blind spots. You want to then use your combined point of view to tighten your thesis and prioritize and make sure it's clear what you didn't pick and why. And then how you know it's working. The first thing I'm going to say is not everything needs an agent. For some things, an if statement is enough. And I know that if statements are out of fashion, but sometimes it's sufficient. And knowing when an agent is needed versus when deterministic rules are needed is an important differentiation. Understanding trust and privacy early on and treating them as first-class citizens, and understanding and exhibiting what success and failure looks like and what you would change if you had more time. And I see that tester here, who I'm sure has a real name, has some really good point and really good points in the chat here in terms of building trust and the importance of earning it. So if you want to go deeper on this, I'm actually having an AI product sense workshop in August 8th. So these are the details for it. Don't worry, we're still going to pick up on analytical thinking and system design in a second. But what we're going to do on August 8th is we're going to run a full product sense, AI product sense case end to end with critique, build the prototype under time pressure, then critique it out loud, and then understand what you're being evaluated on and how to prepare. If you're in between roles or early bird, feel free to email me about scholarship options, and the applications close in 5 days. And I'm not going to have more than 10 people join. So if you want to join, now is the time to think about it. Okay, so now we're going to go into analytical thinking. When you're thinking about analytical thinking, what you're being asked, right? Product rationale, measuring impact, setting goals, and trade-offs. Why product rationale? Why does something exist? Why is it important right now? Measuring impact, what success looks like across the ecosystem. Really important. If you don't understand why a product exists, you cannot measure its impact. Setting goals, both for the team and for your AI agents. What are you committing to? What can you actually move and control? Trade-offs, being able to name them, navigate them, negotiate them. Some of the question types that you're going to have are going to be on measuring goal success, setting goals, navigating trade-offs, and debugging. And I will say that most repertorials that I've seen do not cover trade-offs well. And with AI and with the points of navigating trade-offs are really, really important. And these also come up in system design questions. And really important when you're thinking of AI products, recommendation systems, agentic systems, your metric or your optimization function defines what the system optimizes for. So make sure that you think about those carefully. And this is true on the job as well as in interviews. Product rationale. Pitfalls could also be, and you'd be surprised how many people are just going to say, we're just adding AI as a reason, and they don't really explain why something needs a model rather than a rule, right? So it's really important to say what models can do that rules can't, and really also important to say why now? What changed that makes this possible or necessary? So just to give you a bit of an understanding, when you're thinking about models, they're good when your input is less structured. It's hard to enumerate the specific cases. You have free text tickets, documents in different formats. That's where something that is less deterministic is really good. If there is a rule, but it's not really something very actionable, like tone, relevance, similarity, that's where a model can really help, right? Patterns are changing faster than rules can catch up to them. And and another one would be when you're optimizing towards an outcome with feedback. For example, what piece of content to show on your next as your next item on your Reels or on your TikTok. That is a really classic reinforcement learning problem with some personalization where you're constantly evaluating what is the best piece of content to show right now based on how people are using it. Agents are good when a task is highly repetitive and the shape is relatively stable, even if the specifics of it vary, right? If you're thinking about things like pulling numbers from different dashboards and reconciling them and giving you a summary, that's a great task for agents. The steps are pretty clear, but your paths might have different branches to them, right? For example, support tickets, reading the ticket, categorizing them, looking up the account, drafting the reply. Agents are great for that, right? You're thinking about rules. Rules are good where the logic is very codified. Tax brackets, eligibility criteria, service level agreements, right? Contract terms. You have defined the decision to someone in a way that can challenge it. So if you're thinking about policy breaches or different things like that, that is really where you want to think about rules. And if you're thinking about this, most systems have a flavor of each, so adapting things correctly is really important. Okay. So it's okay to say that sometimes AI isn't the right solution, even if it doesn't feel sexy to say so. Measuring impact. So measuring impact is how you set your success metrics, your North Star, your pitfalls. Model accuracy is not an answer to a product question. It gives you the reality of what the model is doing right now. Hallucination rates are not an engineering concern. They are a product concern. And then relying on offline evaluations only, because when you're relying on offline evaluations only, your users are going to find out first when the underlying model changes or when something goes wrong. What you want to do instead, you want to define the user outcome, then understand how you want to incentivize the model towards that user outcome and understand how accurate it is. And I'll give an example in a second. You want to understand your failure rates and what are the acceptable thresholds for you. And you want to make sure that you're running online evaluations against the baseline so that you can identify your regression before your users do. Your metrics explain the outcomes, they don't replace it, and you need to define the outcomes that matter. And this is true on the job as well as in interviews. Setting goals. Pitfalls. Your North Star becomes what your system is optimizing for. I feel like I'm repeating myself, but it's important to understand. Goals that assume a non-deterministic system will hit a number reliably, just saying, yeah, we'll let the AI or the model fix it, and no guardrails on the failure that the incentive creates. Instead of this, what you want to do for every goal, you want to be able to say what behavior it produces if the system optimizes hard for it. You want to be able to set goals on what the team can actually move and what your systems can move. And you want to make sure that your goals have guardrails and that you understand the different failure modes. If you set the wrong incentives, and I'm sure you guys can think about many examples that we see in how you set the wrong incentives and things don't turn out the way you want them. But if you set the wrong incentives, your system will follow them perfectly. Important, I want to call this out of how you're thinking about setting goals when the metric becomes the incentive. You want to start from the job the user came to do, not an activity that you can count. So if you're going to say engagement, that's not the job the user hired you to do. It might be staying connected with their friends if you're thinking about, a messenger. It might be getting entertained by Reels or by TikTok, right? But it's not just like likes. They didn't come to the platform to like or comment. So you want to set goals on things that the team or your systems can move. For every goal, you want to say what behavior it produces when the system optimizes for it. You want to make sure that you understand failure modes and guardrails. And you want to make sure that you understand how long this metric stays meaningful and what it would take for you to revisit it. If you're thinking about it, customer service chatbot as an example, if your goal is resolved on first response, that might actually mean that your guardrail needs to be escalation rates and repeat contacts, right? Because if you're trying to optimize for something to solve something quickly so that customers don't get frustrated, well, what if the solution is wrong? Well, if the solution is wrong, what you're going to get is escalation rates, repeat contacts, and then it's going to be chaos because your leadership team decided to lay off half of the customer support team, and you're stuck with figuring out how did you come to this situation, right? So if there is a goal that you think is not the right goal to be optimized, it's likely not the right goal. Trade-off. Really important to understand what the trade-offs are and what you're optimizing for. You want to think about just leaving accuracy versus coverage, latency versus cost, just leaving them implicit. And in cannibalization questions, like one metric is up, one metric is down, just counting the usage you took from another surface as usage you created. That's not net new usage or engagement with your platforms. What you want to do instead, name what the system is optimizing for, and then figuring out what you're giving up in each direction. This is also very important in system design questions. You want to assign numbers to make your trade-offs clear, even if they are rough. And you want to make sure that you can ladder up the metrics to a higher common goal before making a judgment call. So describing the trade-off, it gets you 60% of the way there, but it doesn't get you all the way there. And in many cases, your answer is not going to be cut and dry in one direction. It's probably going to be further optimizations, investigations, personalization that come out of it. So when you're thinking about how to communicate trade-offs, right, you want to start with what you're trading off as succinctly as possible, what you're giving up, what you're gaining, what being wrong in either direction means, whether it's reversible. That's really, really important to understand. What would change your mind? What new information would help you break the tie? And all of this before you suggest to throw an A/B test at it. I cannot say how many times I ask a trade-off question, and the first thing I hear from a candidate is, I want to A/B test. When you're subjecting your users to A/B tests, you are subjecting them to questionable experiences. So this is a way that I want you to think. It's not something I want you to recite. Anybody who's worked with me knows that I want you to be clear in your thought process, not turn you into cookie cutters. Okay, here are a few examples of how something that seems like a good number can go wrong. Let's say you have a fraud model. 99, it's false positive rates is 1%, or your true negative rates is 99%, right? You have, say you had 2 million transaction. Well, if 1% is wrong, that's 20,000 transactions that are incorrectly marked as fraud. Now imagine this is somebody who is trying to buy something in the pharmacy and they are being flagged as fraud. That's not a good outcome. The other side, AI assistant or an AI chat. Number of messages exchanged as your success measure. Well, what's wrong with that? Your system learns to optimize towards that, and then it doesn't try to reach to a conclusion of a conversation, and then users stop trusting it. And I think this is really interesting. If you think about Finn, for example, from Intercom, the SaaS product they created, they ended up setting their pricing not on tokens, but on successfully closed outcomes, because they realized that that's what customers would pay for, and that would be what builds customer trust in their system. So two things is, one measured the wrong thing here, the other one taught the system the wrong incentive, right? So you want to be really thoughtful, like when a number sounds good, what does it actually mean? How does it impact? And when you're setting an incentive in the wrong direction, what could go wrong? Okay, system design. I know we are a bit over time, but we should be done by 45, and then we can open it up for Q&A. Okay, system design. Why does it matter? Well, now development speed accelerates, and you are in systems where you have agents that are taking actions, optimizing for our rewards. They connect into systems, and they have memories, right? So the best way I can explain this is, let's say in the old world of writing a SQL query, you needed to know the exact table, column, and place of each data piece, and then you would use that for your analysis. With AI, you just, put the data in, and it runs the analysis for you. You don't need to think about which columns can it access, where it grabs its data from, right? Now take it a step further. Now it can write, it can change the underlying data, it can access highly sensitive information without you even thinking that you gave it access. And when you're taking actions and decisions based of that, all of this can go out of control very, very quickly. These all might sound like engineering details, but each of these is a decision that your product needs to live with, okay? So what you're being evaluated on in system design questions, and this is like, I'm taking this on the angle for the product managers. On one side is the trade-offs that you're making, and the second is the failures that you anticipate. And when you're thinking about a failure mode, there's an inherent trade-off there as well, because if you decide that something isn't of high enough likelihood to address, that's a risk you're taking. And it's okay to take risks. It just means that you need to be aware that those are risks that you're taking. The trade-offs you make. So autonomy versus control, right? How much leeway do you give the AI? Shipping fast versus getting it right. Being able to get the data in real time versus lag. Simple architecture versus scalable architecture. And for example, if you're thinking about an MVP, user experience, like anticipating every user's needs versus engineering feasibility. Failures you can anticipate. Access. What are the database limitations of your system, and who is responsible for making sure they're up to date. Incentives, what is your systems optimizing for? Determinism and non-determinism. If you have the same input in different actions, that means that tests prove you less. What do you do in that case? And then blast radius, runaway costs, outages, mistakes that scale before anybody noticed. So very quickly, a second about the OpenAI and Hugging First story. So essentially what happened is OpenAI tested a model. The story is still unfolding. And essentially what it ended up doing is it ended up attacking Hugging Face, which is where researchers use, which is where researchers go in order to test models, evaluate them, benchmark them. And this wasn't identified until Hugging Face reported weird behavior. It ended up relying on a Chinese model to fight it back. And so there are three failures in the story that we can identify early on. First of all, access. How does sandbox data reach further than well-defined radius? So if anybody of you is familiar with chaos engineering is when you try to see what happens when your system goes out of bounds, when things go wrong, how far they go, and how your systems are defensible against it. So this is an example of something that can be done. The second, incentives. There isn't really understand what are the incentives of the system and why would it attack Hugging Face? What is going on here? And then non-determinism, well, this surprised everyone. So clearly the system didn't behave the way it was supposed to, right? So you could think about this as the model is doing what it's being told, but somewhere along the way, the chain broke, right? And this is still under investigation. Coming out of it, a lot of leaders in the community are calling for an open source. In my opinion, open source won't handle this because in all of those notes on open source, if you look very carefully, you'll see that the two things are missing is liability and responsibility. Who is responsible for the models when they go out of control and what is the liability of it? And that is not specified in those notes. Trade-offs that you get evaluated on very quickly, data in, out, and output out, what happens in between, shipping fast versus getting it right. We spoke about some of the simple architecture versus scalable architecture, user experience versus engineering feasibility, and autonomy versus control, real data versus acceptable lag. Trade-offs, the pitfalls and fixes for system design. You want to make sure that you describe the trade-off and define what you're optimizing for, what you'd need to decide and call out those assumptions clearly. Picking autonomy by preference than by what can be undone. You want to start with the lens of what's a reversible decision and what isn't. Drafting an email is reversible, for example. Sending it isn't. Latency and cost might be left implicit, and try to put rough numbers on them and use that to understand scalability and constraints. What you optimize for, what it costs to be wrong, and what you have to work with. These are very important things to consider. Anticipating failures in terms of system design, treating a passing test as proof that the system works. You want to treat the tests as a floor. You want to constantly monitor the paths. You want to think about what are the ways that things can connect that can make the system fail. Assuming access is bound, you want to really understand what your agents can reach and why, and what are the implications for safety, privacy, and user trust. And no view on what happens at scale when it's wrong. You want to be able to ensure that you can cap the blast radius, the spend limits, the rate limits, stage rollouts. This is also true for AI token consumption. You want to design the remediation before you design the action, essentially. And some of this, for those of you who have had tech leads that they're friends with, I would just highly recommend doing a whiteboarding exercise with them to understand your system design. And if you apply the agentic AI to it, what are the things that could go wrong? Okay. What to do what to do next. First, the first thing to do is diagnose which one you default to. And when I mean what you default to, that is when it's Friday, 10 p.m., and you needed to submit 5 hours ago. When you need an argument to hold up, do you look for what breaks it or do you look for what confirms it, right? If you look for what confirms your argument, that's a validation. When the output looks right and you just ship it, if you check it, if you just ship it, you're the automator. When you disagree with the model, do you argue with it or do you rephrase your statement until the model agrees? So if you want to apply the cyborg thinking, you want to look for what breaks, you want to double check, and you want to argue. When you're on the job, things to think about: your product. What is the problem that it solves? Where AI genuinely helps? And how could AI break it? Your system. Here is something I mentioned earlier. Do a whiteboarding session with a tech lead. Start with inputs, outputs, then identify the trade-offs and the decisions that impact users' experience and trust. And your next document. When you're going for a document for review, a strategy, a PRD, think about what is the outcome that you're optimizing for, how it ladders to your North Star, the gaps, the KPIs for success and failure, data and assumptions, and guardrails. When you're interviewing, if you haven't built with AI yet, I would just start with a simple prompt and just let AI help you. Say, I'm a product manager building a calendar tool to help summarize my email. Help me build a tool to automate this. See where it leads. When you're thinking about AI product sense, I would highly recommend taking notes of how your thinking evolved when you practice. It's a very common follow-up question in interviews for an interviewer to ask you, what were your ideas? What did the AI come up with? And so if you're able to identify, for example, a segment that the AI thought of that you didn't, that helps you identify what comes from you, what comes from them, right? Where you pushed back, how you differentiated qualitative data from qualitative from quantitative data, and where you took the output at face value. Analytical thinking, try practicing AI-specific trade-offs, hallucination rate, system optimization, metric is up, metric is down, system incentives, all of these things. System design, I mentioned this beforehand, do a whiteboarding session on a feature that you've worked with your tech lead or one of the engineers. If you haven't built a system yet, there are tons of system design videos out there. There's also a system design workshop that I ran with Gaurav Sun, and he has really good examples on his YouTube channel for system design questions. And then on behavioral stories, we didn't really touch the behavioral side here, but I want you to think about examples where when you're thinking about AI, you can use it for judgment and not just for productivity. So where did you use it to actually reach an outcome? Okay. Favorite product worksheet. This is something that I promised in my emails. So this is actually the same worksheet that I give my clients, and it helped them prepare for interviews. Stripe, Figma, 11 Labs, so many more. And the reason why the favorite product is a good one, in my opinion, is because it's really easy to practice different scenarios, but this one is weird because when we're thinking about the favorite product, the biggest pitfall is to build for ourselves. And there are different permutations of where this question can land. And in many cases, candidates struggle with thinking about it on their feet. Questions like, how would you apply Airbnb to a B2B use case, right? Or what would Airbnb look like in 20 years? That would be a very OpenAI style question, right? So in my worksheet, you learn why you're being asked this question, the common follow-ups, and essentially where the skeletons are buried, and detailed frameworks to practice and evaluate your responses. And the goal there is to just help you think about different ways that this question can twist and turn and help you prepare for those. So if you want to, scan the QR code and you will get access to it. I'll send you an email with the details. Workshop, I mentioned this beforehand, ACE AI Product Sense interview, Saturday, August 8th. This is going to be a full detailed version. We're going to start with classic product sense, the foundations, and then take that into real-time example using a prototype. Applications close in 5 days. If you are between roles or want to learn about early birds, then email me and I will help you figure that out. Okay, I am going to switch the recording off now because people like privacy when they ask questions. So I'm going to switch it off and leave 15 minutes for Q&A. And thank you so much for joining.